Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Charles from the channel Books on Stereo, and we're here today with another in conversation video, and this one's going to be a really good one. Today I have Desiree from the channel Genki Reader, also on Instagram as well, and I also am joined by Samantha from Books with Samantha. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
I'm good.
Good. And today we're going to be talking about LGBTQIA plus romance novels. I had to do the full abbreviation. So we encompass all the different identities that are in the LGBTQIA plus community. But we're talking about it specifically in romance. And the first question that I want to kick off with is, what do you think about the current landscape of what is currently being offered in terms of LGBT romances right now?
All right, so for me, I think there's two categories it has to be placed into. So the first one's probably going to be the popular and the published ones. So for those, I feel like what happens is that books go into a rotation super easily. We'll have, what was that one that came out? The Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall went into a super rotation and everyone talked about it. And then everyone loved it for the first month or so. And then people came out and was like, wow, I really didn't like the second half of it. And then nobody talked about anything else for months. And then of course, Red, White, and Royal Blue was the it book for a solid year. And nobody talked about anything else for that. But then you have indie romances where I feel like there are a lot of separate ones that get their shine throughout separate periods. So I think it's it just depends, but I think for overall we really tend to focus on one book and then we don't talk about anything else until the next popular book comes out, and it's almost never anything but MM, which I mean it's not fair, but it's almost always MM is the top LGBTQIA plus book. I've never, maybe that one science-based historical, the female one had shine, but
Olivia Waite.
Yeah, but that was really it was a blip. It wasn't really.
Yeah, no one talked about it that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with pretty much everything Desiree said. I feel like if we look at the history of romance, this is probably a time where we're getting the most diversity when it comes to LGBTQIA books. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's where we're supposed to be or where we should be. I can definitely acknowledge that there are some lack of diversity in comparison to all of the other romances that are available. And I love that, Charles included the entire abbreviation, because in romance, a lot of times it does feel like male kind of dominates this genre, when I would love to see more romances, sapphic romances, non-binary romances, just so people can see themselves on page, especially in a romance book, and see their own happily ever after. I think that's so important. Also with this new age of illustrated covers, I would love to see more romance covers with openly gay or queer couples, not just in an illustrated couple, actual cover models. So I feel yes, we can acknowledge and be happy at the fact that we're getting more diversity, but I feel we also have to acknowledge that it's just a path to where we need to be. This isn't the end all be all. I definitely think there are more improvements.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Samantha, and Desiree as well. I think just the way Desiree, you kind of separate to traditionally published and indie, I definitely feel traditionally published, that MM or just in general the LGBTQIA plus category is really underwhelming. You have major take the paranormal series where they have 30 plus books, or just the mega series in general, whatever subgenre within romance that you want to kind of tackle into. A lot of times when authors want to do an one MM book in that series, Nalini Singh has one for her, I believe, her Archangels series that is the next book is MM, and people are just absolutely hating on the book before it even comes out. And just in general, I feel Red, White, and Royal Blue had so much else going on within it that you could just go oh, I really like just the wish fulfillment politics side of the story, and you can kind of just forget about the romance. But in terms of pushing those type of narratives in mainstream romances, it's really lacking. I think something to talk about, or something by Meryl Wilsner, was the first Berkeley FF romance that they ever published. Olivia Waite was one of the first to make an FF historical romance. So I just think in terms of traditionally published, it's just really slow, and I think it's gonna take quite a long time to get to the same level that we have in the indie, which I think indie space you see a lot more MM, you see a lot more you see a couple FF titles here and there, but I still think even that selection in and of itself is very lacking in terms of what you get. You either get an MM that's gay for you or a coming out narrative, or usually features like two white characters, like one being very alpha and one being very femme, typically how they write them. And then FF is like barely, you have to like search through like tons and tons of pages to find a couple FF romances. And if you want like trans, non-binary, asexual rep, it's basically you're looking for a unicorn at that point. Yeah, so like that kind of brings me into another thing I want to talk about, some of the problematic tropes that you see within this specific category that you don't see. And because sometimes I just want you to take like Immortals After Dark but make it queer. That's like all I want. You just like swap the characters' gender identities, sexualities, and just go with it. But sometimes you get very stuck in the LGBTQIA plus category of romance, where you get some of the same tropes, just like repeat. And from some of the people, some authors that are really popular in that genre, that's pretty much all they do. They like do like coming out story, but they do it 10 different ways, or they do the gay for you. So what do you guys think of those kind of prevalent tropes that you've seen in this genre, and do you think there are any more tropes that kind of caught your eye?
Yeah. I do think the gay for you trope can definitely be problematic. I can think of quite a few male romances where it has a openly bisexual or openly gay character, but then they always fall for the straight guy. And the straight guy, there's a lot of conversations where they're having a lot of problematic conversations about being gay or being queer. I'm not gay because of this, or there's just so much problematicness in that for the gay for you trope, where I just wish like we didn't need to have that narrative of the straight guy like kind of basically insulting like the queer community and rationalizing it by he's only in love with like this one person. Like I just think like I'm kind of over that in male romances for sure. Like although I love like Serena Bowen, Elle Kennedy, absolutely love some of their books, I feel like they tend to go towards that trope.
I can agree with that. I'm over the whole like I'm not gay, and they freeze up and they're scared.
Yeah,
like I'm really over that. I'm fine with the he's the straight character and then he like discovers himself and he had never thought about it type. Like I like those because it feels to me like you never had the chance to explore yourself, and then here's like your shot. Like you finally figured out that maybe there was something else on the horizon that you hadn't explored before. That I'm okay with, and I think that that's probably like a super valid story that a lot of people can relate to. So those I really like. But there was a trope that I don't even know if you can call this a trope, or maybe more of like the way that they write it. It's like when the couple is definitely a male-female couple that's been replaced by two men or two women, but most likely it's two men, because it's like Lucy Lennox is like super what's the word for it, responsible for doing something like this. Like this is her thing. I read two books by her that were both done at different points in her career. Like one was I think actually her first book, and I read that one recently-ish and I dropped it at like 50%, and the other one was a really recent one from like 2020, and it was called Virgin Flyer, and I was like, the synopsis is everything, and like the cover is so pretty, and like the guy on it is hot and everything, so I had everything going for it. And then I read it and it was like, I am totally cool with like exploring traditional like relationship constructs within like the context of being queer. I think that's cool and actually like a super valid point. But I didn't like that with the main character. First off, he was in love with his best friend who did not respond to him at all. And he was like super like judgy about his friend, which was weird, that he was like that towards the main character. And I didn't like that the love interest treated him like a woman in a lot of ways, and the conversation around women just in general was kind of awful. The way she talks about women in her books is like really awful, because there was this line, I sent this to Lacey, where she was saying, or Lucy Lennox, she wrote that, oh, well, you're not delicate like a woman would be. And I was like, why did that have to be in the book?
Yeah.
I didn't like that. So I dropped the book almost probably like 20 pages after that line. And the other one, this comes up a lot too. the whole I hate myself because I'm gay, but then literally no one else in the book cares that they're gay. So like they're hating on themselves the entire time, and everyone's like super supportive of them, but they still have like this thing in their head. It's like, again, that's like something super valid and probably happens to a lot of people, but the way that they write it, it just feels so weird and like problematic and traumatizing at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't get why that has to be a whole trope. That's come up a few times, and I've dropped books because of that. I hate that one. Really hate that one.
I think there's a difference between, discovering your sexuality, like you said, someone who has never had the chance to explore their sexuality, versus exuding problematic behavior and having very harmful conversations about the queer community in a romance book. I just thought of another one that I think is not necessarily problematic, but it's just kind of a bummer, is like male romances or straight couples. You always get like more steamy romances or novellas, but I feel like with sapphic romances in particular, or non-binary romances, even asexual, it's almost always fade to black. It is almost always fade to black. And that kind of drives me a little nuts, because it's like some people still want the steamy bits for a queer couple. So it drives me a little nuts when those are like fade to black. So people can't see happily ever after on page for themselves.
Would there be steamy bits for an ace romance though, since they're not like into the
it's a spectrum. Sexuality is a spectrum. So for some, there are, like, I can think of like Wolf Song. I think the third book in that series has an asexual character, and they do have steamy bits in that one.
Yeah, that's kind of like one of the things that I feel like has always been talked about when talking about this certain genre of romance, is the fact that a lot of it's being written by, I'll be very frank with this term, by white women who are normally straight. So when Desiree brought up the whole mapping, I'm blanking the word, but an MF couple, that dynamic onto an MM couple, and kind of describing those certain like more masculine, more feminine roles, we tend to see that in a lot of MM, especially when they're not coming from people who actually identify with those identities that they're writing with. So what do you guys think about that whole conversation? I think it's okay if you're not a member of that community to write stories about that. But I do also think you have a responsibility, if you're like one of like the Lucy Lennoxes or like one of the big authors in this space, that you really should be taking time to create stories that are more reflective of that community. Like one example is Lauren Blakely. One of the things that I was really, when she came out with her first MM book, she said intentionally, this has zero homophobia. Like these characters are out. It's like literally just like if you took one of her other romances, stripped out the gender, like the MF, and just put two guys in it, and just had it just felt like just like a normal Lauren Blakely romance, but it was just MM. I didn't see as much of those like problematic issues, because it was intentionally just like, this is like just normalizing, hey, this is just an MM book. These just characters happen to be MM. So what do you guys think?
For me, I think that this is like a huge topic for both like romance books and for manga, because it is majority written by women. There are a lot of problematic tropes in manga, and there are a lot of problematic tropes that come up in romance books. But I think it's more so, you have to tread lightly and like know what you're writing, and like be respectful, be super respectful, and also get people to read your work and look over it and see if this is okay for when you just put things out there. Women are the majority who read and write romance. I'm sorry to say. So if we're doing, MM romances, it's going to be like an even smaller pool, I think, to put out there if we're going to put mostly, I don't want to say just mostly own voices, because you can have men who write and MM who probably don't identify as well. But like, there's just such a small like portion of like men who actually write romance. And I think there's also another element to look into, is that internalized misogyny, that men don't look favorably on romance as a genre to begin with. So then how are we going to get more men to write for romance if it's already a genre that they don't think is deserving of their time or anything else? So it's like a huge construct. You could probably do a whole video on this. It's a huge thing that has to be analyzed. I think that it's so complicated for me. And I go back and forth with this all the time. Like, is it okay for me to read so much MM and I'm not a queer man? Or is it okay for women to write so much MM and they're not queer or a man? Even though there are a lot of queer women who read and write MM romance, but not to discount them as well. I think that's another aspect to be looked into. It's just a huge topic, and I I want to like have a whole like seminar on this one, but I don't know. I have so many thoughts, and I don't know how to get any of them out. Sam, take it from here.
You're good. Everything you said, I agree with. I don't see a problem with straight women writing queer stories, but I think that they have to be very careful. And I think it's very easy to go into a space of fetishizing, especially in male-male romances, straight white women fetishizing a male-male romance. That can be a very easy thing for them to do, and they need to be very careful for that. And they also need to take it as an opportunity for, even when they're giving ARCs or publishing their book, to allow queer reviewers to speak their truth and speak their own experiences and give them reviews of the book, not just trying to go toward the demographic that is straight white women, to be completely honest. So I think that it's possible to do it, and I don't find women who are straight writing queer romances inherently problematic, but there are certain things that you have to look out for, like being fetishized of this queer community. And also, you know, if you're giving out ARCs or you're doing marketing, like make sure that you're allowing the community that you're writing about to be able to read those books, for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I think just like some of the comments, like that kind of makes it make more sense why FF is like so like, I would say like it's like barely present in terms of romance. Like if you look at, let's say like 100 MM books come out in a month. I mean, 100 LGBT romances come out in a month. Probably 90 of those are all MM, and then like 10 are FF. Or like even in menages, like you don't typically see like an MFF. You usually like an MMF
Right.
for menages, and I think that kind of plays into the fact that since romance is primarily read by women, it may not, because like even I think there was a controversy with One Last Stop, like Casey McQuiston, like someone on TikTok basically said like how they loved Red, Wild, and Royal Blue, but then basically trashed One Last Stop because it was FF. I think that's like an interesting disconnect.
Yeah.
Like even like when Samantha, you mentioned like FF tends to be more fade to black, it's almost every FF that I've seen, or sometimes they try to ascribe to like heteronormative like sex, like where it's like penetration is like the key thing. And so like with FF, you do have to like kind of rethink. Like you can have pegging present, but I think a lot of times we have to rethink, because in MF it's like very easy. Like, okay, penetrative, that's the way to go. You can write it 20 different ways, but when you get into the LGBT world, you have to kind of think about some of these things a little bit differently. I think MM is quite easy or to pull off and like be more accessible and be more widely available to readers than FF, which I think is very interesting why FF doesn't get as much love. Like, even still to this day, it's still not. It's probably like MM is the number one, FF is probably distant number two, and then good luck trying to find any other types of identities.
Yeah,
in your
I think that one is so interesting for like the other identities. I think they always fall into a scope of MM. For like, so for example, you may have like a non-binary character who's mass presenting, who gets with another male character. So like that's very common. And one of my favorite books is, I can't think of the title right now, but that it has that sort of dynamic where the main character's name is Ben, and I just can't remember why can't I remember? It's one of my favorite books. It'll come to me later. But so things like that, you'll see that that'll happen, or it'll be an ace character who's male who gets with another guy character. So like the separate identities that come like a little bit later, it'll usually be like two mass presenting characters together in the trans books as well. So you have like the Felix Ever After and Cemetery Boys, you know. So it's interesting how that all comes, especially in YA. That I think it's interesting in YA that it always skews towards MM as well, because it's not completely romance, like, you know, I mean it is, but it isn't, because it's not adult. But I think that something to look into that I haven't thought about why for YA. I think that's such a different like area that you would think there would be a little bit more diversity in like the couplings for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's also interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And what kind of irks me is, I mean, these books are out there. There's authors who are doing the work, and usually indie authors who are giving us, you know, these books that we're looking for. But what can be really frustrating is that a lot of people who are having this conversation, they're like, oh, well, there's this one sapphic romance that isn't fade to black, or there's this one romance that's non-binary. And they want to be like, here's the book, be happy with that. Why are you still complaining? Or why are you asking for more? And I'm like, just one book, like people deserve options. And if you look at the comparison of straight couples versus queer couples, like it is a huge, huge gap. So yes, like there are books out there that are more diverse, but it's like nowhere even near the options that straight couples have.
Yeah.
That's so true. Like that brings up to like one of my, sometimes I just like get in a mood where I only want to read LGBT romances, but sometimes I just can't find, like, I know I can find a straight version of like whatever trope I'm looking for, but I'm like, I can't find it in the LGBT like space. Like sometimes I maybe I want like a romantic suspense that like has slight paranormal vibes. I can find that with a straight couple. Like I can find a bajillion of those very easily. But then I might only see like the same authors that I know of, small town romances, maybe a couple of royalty romances here and there, the bodyguard romances. Like it's still, in terms of the variety of stories that you get, it's still very limited, which I think is interesting as well. And like another offshoot topic, we talked a little bit about own voices. Do you think as readers should prioritize those voices more? Like when we like pick out our books, pick out our TBR, should we make it an effort to say, because I know some readers will only, that's some of the reasons why they don't read LGBT romances as much, because they feel like they feel some way about reading like a white, non-identifying author who doesn't identify with the actual sexuality that they're writing about. But do you think as we to promote those books more?
Here's my whole thing with this one, because the identity for like being queer, it's different than identifying with your race. So you can't necessarily always see queerness, right? So someone may put out a book and then it'll have a queer couple, queer characters, what have you, and they may be queer, but they're closeted. And then people don't know, and it is an own voices story, but it doesn't have the own voices hashtag. And this was a huge thing on Twitter not too long ago, where one author who said that he couldn't get his book to come out because he didn't come out as queer, as bi. He's married to a woman, but he identifies as bi. And he basically he was forced to come out to get the own voices hashtag to be put on his book. So I don't know how I necessarily feel about only reading own voices, because then you really don't know until you read the book if the experience is like valid or not. I want people to like read the book and then tell you, like, is this a good representation or not? Give your review if you already identify as openly as this thing that's being portrayed in the book, if this is a good representation or not. I just want people to be a little bit more mindful. We've had so many authors being forced to come out unnecessarily before they were ready, because the internet is just pushing them to come out, or making fun of them, or saying that this is not a book to be uplifting and like celebrated because the person isn't supposedly own voices. Just like Becky Albertalli, that was a huge mess.
Yeah, that was.
And I felt really bad that she had to come out like that before she was ready. That's awful. So that's my thing.
Yeah, I think it's a personal preference if you feel like something needs to be own voices. The way I think about it, it's kind of like how they say, like, you vote with your dollar. You are what you want to see is what you should be promoting. So if you want to see more diverse reads, I feel like as a reviewer or as a reader, you kind of take the responsibility of looking for those reads and promoting them, because that's essentially what publishers are going to see and what they're going to continue to do. So yeah, I kind of teeter-totter with it, because I don't see anything wrong with like a straight person writing a queer romance if it's done tactfully. But I also do think that own voices deserve a platform of their own and should be prioritized for reviewers in particular. If you're like a reader who's just at home and you're reading for your personal preference, but I think publishers and reviewers kind of have a different responsibility, that it is important to prioritize own voices stories.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think for what I kind of see, like when I champion like books that are LGBT, I really love when I find like an established author who maybe will write a series where like a couple books are MM, some are MF, and just because like even just like talking to some of those authors, like they got actually a lot of hate because I guess like
Mhm.
in series like not all readers will want to like read an MM book. If they want like a 3-book series, they want them all to be MF. So I'm liking
Mhm.
when you see like some authors are like, no, we're gonna let the characters be who the characters are and let their romantic pairings come naturally. And if one book is MM, the other book is FF, the next book could be MF. Like they don't put rules on it. So like even just that casual diversity, I champion that a lot more because then it's just like it's kind of normalizing the genre in a way where it's just not in its own category, like buried on Amazon. Because even on Amazon, it's very rare when you see LGBT books kind of populate in the top 100 on Amazon alongside straight books.
Mhm.
So like that's like kind of thing that I like to do. Like when I see that happening, I'm like, okay, everyone are going to go read this book, like because I think that's a big deal for an author. Because I think a lot of mainstream authors are starting to see like what Penelope Douglas doing, Trist Six, Venom.
Yeah, the
I
Sapphic
think
Women.
I think a lot of authors are realizing like, hey, there's like the audiences are like willing to go over to that side with me. Like there's readership there that's like desperate, not I would say desperate, but like wanting more content that you don't get with like just the published authors that are already within that one genre. So like I like when I see that because I don't have a problem reading. I think if you do the work and you're respectful with what you're doing, you can write. I don't even know where I was going with that. You can write someone else's experience that isn't the same as your own.
Yeah.
But I forgot my follow up question. Okay, but just like talking.
Said there's an audience for that though, because a lot of the excuses like, oh, readers aren't picking these books. I'm like, you can't say there's an audience. There's not an audience for it when you're not giving them options. Like obviously, there's not an audience because they have no choices but to read what you're giving them.
Yeah, that's true. Because I even have to make a conscious decision. I'm like, hey, I want to find FF books, and like this is all I want to read. So like I have to like make it conscious because like I can easily get distracted with like all the straight couple books from all the authors that I already like. So I'm like, oh, but they just like all my favorite authors just dropped like a book each in the past couple of months. So it's like it's very easy. Like I never have to be in want for a straight romance. Like I can go on Hoopla or go on Libby and find like 20, 25 options to choose from. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that was not hard at all.
I have a question if that's okay. So while you were talking, I kind of thought of like, what do you guys think, or do you find it problematic when you're reading a book and maybe there's a side character where there's nothing on page that makes them seem like a queer character, but after the fact, the author's like, oh yeah, this character was bisexual. Oh yeah, this character was gay. I don't want to use this as an example because I know Harry Potter overall is very problematic, but like that story, nothing on paper it shows that Dumbledore is a queer character or a gay character. And then years later, J.K. Rowling wants to be like, oh yeah, Dumbledore was gay. It almost feels like they're kind of like appeasing the masses for a sense. So like, how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah,
Well, that's messed up. I
It
think
is.
There's so many like movies and books and
They all
authors
do
do
it.
that.
I feel like if you're going to come out later, there has to be something in the book that aligns with your theory. So like when she said that, since we're using that example, and I know the example well enough, I felt like where I had read the books forwards and backwards, literally where. There was no indication he hadn't had like letters on his desk that were like from a lover that Harry like looked over and saw. There was no like so and so walked out of the office and it looked like they, you know, like had a nice time of so whatever. There was nothing like that. And I feel like if you're going to make the statement, there just has to be something there that shows who they are. I don't think that that's fair to people who are part of the queer community just for you to slap their title onto something just randomly so that it's now sort of a hot topic. I think she really did want to do that to make it a hot topic, and she continues to do that with a bunch of other things. But you know what I mean? Like I don't like when people do that after the fact. There has to be something. It has to align with the theories and like the synopsis, not the synopsis, the writings of your book. It has to align.
Yeah, I feel like in that situation, it's like almost trying to have your cake and eat it too type of representation. Like I like one of the things like in this may be completely off tangent, but my example is like Captain America and Bucky. Like for years I'm like, there's something there between these two characters. Like it does not make sense that they're that loyal to each other. I'm like, I get being best friends. I'm like, there's clearly something here. But like I feel like one of the examples that I love pointing out is like Rick Riordan. Like he never actually went back into like, oh, some random character from the Percy Jackson series was LGBT. He actually wrote a full series for Apollo with a queer identity and like actually did the work and actually created that representation. It's not enough to go back and say, like, even if there was like mentions of it, you don't get kudos for just dropping breadcrumbs, especially nowadays. Like you need to on page. That's why I think when Loki, whatever, if people follow Marvel, when they said like he was like canonically confirmed he is bisexual, like how big of a deal that was, because like I think you have to on page. It's not enough to just like kind of like doing like a wink wink nudge nudge. And like if J.K. Rowling wanted to include a queer character, she should have done it from the beginning and wrote that into the narrative instead of kind of going backwards and saying, oh yeah, Dumbledore is gay, and then in the movies come out and where everyone's like, where's Dumbledore and Grindelwald? There's like zero romance here. So I'm like, are you sure? Like, did you just tell us this? But like, I think audiences now are just like, no, and we're getting better representation across all different types of media. And romance, I still feel like is one where it can use a little bit more love and care to get more stories that actually do that work and do tell a wide range of stories. But I feel like now we're at the point in society where we can go like, yeah, we can start pushing more of these stories ahead. There's enough people who will support them than boycott them, which is which is like the unfortunate truth about this genre. Some people just there's still homophobia out in the world, and some people on principle would just never read or support stories like this. So it's like always that kind of like glass ceiling that you will never be able to shatter. So kind of going back to like our personal, like what type of LGBT romances do you typically read? Are you more MM or MF, or do you kind of like have like a wide variety that you kind of choose a sample from every now and then?
I feel like I have a sample. I mean, I do read a lot of straight couples, but I really do look for sapphic romances. It's something that I enjoy personally reading about, and I like to find like almost like those hidden gems. I'm also a huge fan. Probably my favorite trope is polyromances. So I love like 2 guys, 1 girl, 2 girls, 1 guy, threesomes, foursomes, and moresomes. Like it's just my absolute favorite trope, to be completely honest. So, and usually you'll find a variety of sexual identities in those polyromances. You'll find bisexual, non-binary. So I think it's a little bit more open, and most of those characters are very open with their sexuality. There's not a lot of shaming or biphobia in it. So I do really, I would say I still read a lot of male-female romances because I read a lot of historical romances, and that's kind of the options that are available. But if I'm looking specifically for it, I tend to gravitate towards polyromances and sapphic romances for sure.
So I've basically over the last year, I haven't read anything that wasn't MM. All of the manga I read is boys love, which is the same as MM. I got tired of shoujo, honestly. Someone in the live show said that, oh, all Desiree reads is smut and shoujo. I'm like, I haven't read shoujo in 3 years. I literally have not read shoujo. Yes, they did. They were right. So I don't know, like a lot of the like, what is it? They call it Yuri, or like girls love is the new term. A lot of the ones that I've tried to read, I feel like, this is so terrible to say, but I feel like it's been written like for men, and it doesn't like appeal to like my gaze as a reader. It doesn't even feel like it's supposed, not supposed. How am I supposed to wear this? It doesn't really feel like
it's geared towards you.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's geared towards me, and it doesn't feel like a relationship that would be between 2 girls. Almost, it feels kind of like. So one of the stories that I read, it had this girl who was like super like aggressive in a male kind of way about her relationships. So I felt like she was almost like being presented as like the guy of the relationship, or the guy of the relationship, and then like the other girl was like super feminine and like frilly, and I felt like she was being presented as like the girl in the relationship, which of course couples like that exist, not to say that they don't exist. It didn't feel right, and I didn't really like it. I try, so I've been trying to like, you know, branch out to more female novel romances. It just doesn't work for me in manga. I feel like that isn't really geared towards me as an audience. I really do think that is geared way more towards men. The love stories, so to speak, don't feel like love stories. It feels kind of just, we're here just for the wham bam thank you ma'ams, and that's it. And I'm not really always down for that. I actually do need a love story in between all my wham bams and thank you ma'ams. So I'm not really about that.
I feel called out because that's
Okay, I'm gonna back you up, Sam. Like, I share your poly romance. Like, I would say mostly I read like straight romances, but then when I get tired of them, then it's usually MM or poly. But like, I put a huge asterisk on poly. It has to be like everyone is like with each other, like not reverse harem. Like, it has to be like a Katie Roberts type style deal where like everyone is in the mix. Like, that's my idea of poly, when it's just like 2 guys, 1 girl, and it's like nothing crossing or anything like that. That's where I'm like, okay, that's not realistic. Like, if you're all doing the thing together, like, you have to have, like, you're already indirectly having sex with each other. So I'm like, why tiptoe around this?
Yeah, I think the true poly romance is when they're all, you know, sexually intertwined, and they also have emotional like attachments to each other as well. It's not just about the one female or the one male. They're all 3 of them or 4 of them, whatever, how many people are in the relationship are together. If it's like one girl and the guys are only focused on her pleasure and they're not, you know, interacting with one another, that's more menage to me, not polyamorous. But I'm very picky when it comes to polyromances.
We're on the same wavelength. Like, we're both like very picky. Like, I have to have certain requirements, or I'm like, nope. I'm like, get this out of here. This isn't actually poly. Just call it reverse harem, whatever. Like, it's not a poly romance. I'm sorry.
I can't do any of those, and Sam knows this. I can't do reverse harem. I can't do poly. It has to be 2 people. I can't do more than that. And I've tried. I really have tried. I've tried reading novels and I've tried doing manga, and every single time it's not for me.
Yeah, I would say it's not for everyone. It's like a certain thing you have to like, either you like or you don't like. Some authors don't do it well, but when you do get authors that really do it well and that flesh out all the characters and make you see why it makes sense.
Yeah.
For these 3 to be, because it's really, you have to figure out what each of the character needs from each other and how they fulfill each of each other's needs. And that's quite of a hard thing to do when you have like more than 2 characters, because then you have to like the third dynamic, and then has to change the sexual dynamic, and it's a whole thing. But I think what I want to kind of leave us off on before we dive into recommendations is, why do you think reading diversely in terms of specifically in this conversation, like sexual identity diversity, why do you think that's so important to a romance reader? And why do you think that's something that you internally like to reflect in your reading as well? I think it really comes down to the fact that love is love, and even if you don't identify with any of these other different sexual identities, I do believe like just all the identities are on a sliding scale. Like, you can be like 90% of something and 10% of something else. Like, you can change throughout the course of your life. And I think it's just important for like those stories to have a place in romance, because I love when an author comes in and brings a fresh new perspective or tackles a new sexual identity that I haven't seen tackled in a romance. Like, what does it look like when you have an asexual or like a demisexual romance, and how does that change like marriage and kids that like you typically see in like your normal heteronormative romance? I think too, like, just branching out from that alone, from just having the marriage and the kids, like, how does it look like for different couples? How does the happily ever after play out for different couples? Because I think you're alienating a lot of people by not including those stories. And I think everyone deserves like to see themselves reflected in a romance.
Yeah.
And that's kind of some of my reasons why I like to read diversely.
Yeah. And I think I said that like I definitely agree that everyone deserves to see happily ever after for themselves on page. I think that's so important. Like as in YA books and romance books and like whatever you're reading, that's so important to see identify with a character. It's not necessary to enjoy a romance, but I feel like for a queer reader that could really be life-changing for them. But also, if you don't identify with that specific sexuality, like you could even take it as like reading it and understanding a different perspective that could help you in relationships in your life and understanding people in your life and just being a better ally and being more supportive. So I think there's so much to benefit from it for sure, to see different types of love on page.
Just like you said, I think it's a benefit. Just even in the conversation we had earlier where I was not even 100% sure about like the asexuality of being like having their steamy moments or not. I know that there's a spectrum, but sometimes I'm not always like 100% on like what that means for each person. So that's like always great that they can have different types of perspectives and explanations and just different feelings on what it means to them and books. And I just, the world we live in, I know that a lot of people just, they don't accept queer people. I live in the South, so I especially know that. And it's always like eye-opening, like once I like leave my little cocoon of my room and then I see someone saying something like just awful, you know, after I read something that was so sweet and heartfelt and these people just love each other. And that's such a pure emotion that I think that why would anyone want to hate on that? I can't understand that. Personally, that all they really want to do is to love another person. And I think that just having it out there will kind of not always necessarily explain, but get people a little bit more comfortable with the idea of there just being someone who's different from you.
I think to like set people off on a great, if you're new to LGBT romances or you're someone who always reads the genre, I think our recommendations would be a great place to either continue your reading journey or start your reading journey. So for me, I would say I would recommend A Hard Case by Max Walker. It's the first book in the Stonewall investigation series. I haven't finished the series in its entirety, but a little bit of a premise is that there is a serial killer who is targeting queer people, and each of the books is like another character is getting caught in some certain circumstance. They go to Stonewall investigation, and the pairing is like an investigator and client type relationship while you're getting this overarching story of who is this like serial killer going around. So it's really interesting. I haven't seen a mystery / romantic suspense title, and this one is actually his own voices as the author is a gay man. So I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but they're on audio as well. And I think all his books are in KU as well. They're all really fantastic. So that's my recommendation.
Okay, so mine is Coming Up for Air by Amanda Mewisen, however you say her last name. I found this on Scribd. Like, it was one of the books that didn't have an audiobook, but I was like, this is interesting. So it's a merfolk book because as the character explains, the mer people don't have actual gender, but because his love interest in the book is gay, when he takes human form, he takes form as a man. So he does identify as man in his human form, but merfolk don't have gender. So the sex scene in this was actually quite interesting. I'm not going to tell you how it's interesting, but it's very interesting because they do have like sex with their tails, so that's something to look forward to if you do read it. So basically the premise of it to not get you to turn away from it, because it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. Really, it is. It's our main character. He is kind of like an ex-thug, sorta. Like he is kind of under the thumb of the neighborhood boss, crime boss, whatever. He lives in a not so great neighborhood, and he's trying to get out of it, but he really can't because of his circumstances. And he's also kind of the landlord / mechanic of his building, but also not. People just kind of go to him for like mechanical issues, and he doesn't get paid. They just like give him cookies or something like that. And then one day when he almost dies because one of the rival gangs tries to drown him, literally in the ocean with cement blocks on his feet. Old school mafia thing going. The merfolk person like finds him, and then he drags him back to land, and like just kind of like the Little Mermaid, he gets to be not a mer person. He gets to be a human for a certain amount of time, with the stipulation that his love needs to tell him that he loves him, or else he'll turn back into like
A
a
merfolk.
mermaid. Yeah, a merfolk.
Yeah.
So it's one of the most interesting things I've ever read, and I really, really liked it.
I haven't read either of those, so this is exciting. I do have the coming up for air. I think it's on Kindle Limited, right? I have
I
the
think
ebook.
so.
I think it's on Kindle Limited. The one I'm going to recommend is a sapphic romance. I always get tongue-tied with the title, so I'm sorry. It's Being Hospitable by Mika James. This one is a short, steamy, sapphic novella. It's a brother's best friend romance as well as an age gap romance. So one of our heroines has always had a crush on her brother's best friend named Kiki, and they've kind of like always been flirting with each other. Like the younger heroine is a little bit of a tease and kind of like flounces around like in her underwear trying to like tease the other heroine. But Kiki ends up letting the other heroine stay at her apartment because of a job opportunity, and then it's just closer, and they decide to, you know, fall for each other and pursue their romance. The reason I like this one a lot is because it had great communication. Like they were very open about the relationship to the best friend and their brother. This also has slight BDSM elements to it too. And yeah, I just really like this one.
These are all really good recommendations. So everyone watching this video, take down these recommendations. You guys will absolutely love them. Like I said in the description box down below, I'll link everyone's channel. So definitely go subscribe to everyone on YouTube, as well as their Instagrams and Twitter. If everyone has a Twitter, I didn't check. I think everyone here has a Twitter. Okay, sorry. But thank you guys again for so much for watching this video. Thank you guys again for coming on my channel to do this little episode, and let me know down in the comment section down below what you think of the discussion, and if you have any other interesting points or interesting topics that we didn't bring up in this video. I'll catch you guys with a brand new video. Bye everyone.